Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Carbonomics. We're tackling Goldman Sachs' latest report, kind of a
Hefty.
hefty, filled with charts and data about decarbonization.
Yeah,
It's the kind of thing that would take you hours to get through.
absolutely.
So we're here to give you the inside track on what really matters.
That's right. We'll break down the key insights, about the costs of decarbonization across different sectors and what trends are emerging.
The report talks a lot about this thing called the decarbonization cost curve.
Right.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so think of it as a visual representation of how much it costs to avoid emitting, a ton of CO2 using different technologies.
Okay.
The lower the point on the curve, the cheaper the technology.
I see.
So what's really fascinating is that the lower half of that curve, representing the most affordable technologies, has actually decreased by 7% year over year.
So that means those key technologies are getting even cheaper to deploy.
That's right.
What's driving that progress?
Innovation, primarily. Since 2019, that same lower half of the cost curve has seen a cumulative drop of 45%.
Wow.
It's a testament to how quickly things are advancing, in areas like solar and battery technology.
That's huge. That's a significant shift.
Yeah.
But I'm sensing there's a but coming.
Okay.
The report also talks about rising costs in some areas, right?
Yes. Unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
While we're seeing, rapid progress in some areas, the technologies needed to decarbonize those hard-to-abate sectors,
Okay.
like heavy industry, are actually getting more expensive.
Why is that? Are we hitting some kind of technological wall?
It's more complex than that. Some of these technologies are still in their early stages, so they lack the scale and efficiency of more mature solutions.
Right.
Plus, some of them rely on green hydrogen, which, as the report highlights, has seen a cost increase recently.
So it's a mixed bag then. Progress in some areas, challenges in others.
Precisely. But let's focus on the positive for a moment. The report identifies some clear winners, in the decarbonization race this year.
Okay. I'm intrigued who's coming out on top.
Batteries, solar power, and biofuels are leading the charge.
Okay.
Batteries, in particular, have seen the most dramatic improvements, making electric vehicles and solar plus storage systems significantly cheaper.
What kind of impact are we seeing in real-world terms?
Well, the cost of decarbonizing passenger vehicles has dropped from $645 per ton of CO2 emissions avoided to just $400 per ton.
Wow.
That makes electric vehicles a much more attractive option, both for consumers and for investors looking at the electric vehicle market.
That's a compelling argument for those considering investing in EV companies. What about solar power? Is that still on track?
Solar is continuing its steady decline in cost, becoming 12% cheaper than last year.
Okay.
And biofuels have seen a significant drop as well, about 40% cheaper thanks to lower prices for things like renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel.
So it sounds like we have some real momentum in those areas, but the report also delves into some tricky geopolitical issues, right? This deglobalization trend seems to be a big concern.
Yes, it is. One of the key takeaways is that countries wanting to produce more things locally could significantly impact the pace and cost of decarbonization.
Help me understand this. What's the connection between local production and decarbonization costs?
Some clean technologies like bioenergy already have local production chains in many places.
Okay.
But others, like solar panels and batteries, rely on highly efficient global supply chains, often dominated by China.
So if countries prioritize making these things themselves, what happens?
Goldman Sachs crunched the numbers and it gets expensive quickly. They estimate that Western-made solar panels and batteries would need significant import tariffs, 115% and 55% respectively, just to be competitive with imports.
That sounds like it would add a hefty premium to our clean energy bills. Are there any other surprising factors that could influence decarbonization costs?
Interestingly, the report suggests that lower gas prices could actually accelerate decarbonization, at least in the power sector.
That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't cheaper fossil fuels make renewables less attractive?
You'd think so. But here's the logic. Lower gas prices, perhaps driven by increased LNG supply, would incentivize a faster shift from coal to gas.
Right.
And since gas emits less CO2 than coal, that transition would have a net positive effect on decarbonization, outweighing any negative impact on the economics of renewable energy.
So it's a bit of a stepping stone approach. We move from coal to gas first, then from gas to renewables.
Exactly. Goldman Sachs estimates that under this scenario, the power sector's decarbonization cost curve could drop by 20%.
This is all fascinating, but I'm guessing the report also dives into specific sectors.
Absolutely, and that's where we'll pick up in part two. We'll explore the nuances of decarbonization in transportation, power generation, industry, and buildings.
Excellent. I'm eager to hear more about how these trends play out in different sectors. We'll be back in part two to continue our deep dive into the Goldman Sachs Carbonomics report. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Carbonomics. In the last part, we explored some of the key trends shaping decarbonization costs, but I'm really curious to hear how these dynamics play out across different sectors.
It's fascinating to see how each sector faces, unique challenges and opportunities on this journey toward decarbonization.
Right.
Let's start with transportation, shall we?
Okay. Transportation, it's an area that touches everyone's lives, and there's a lot of buzz about electric vehicles these days. Is the report as bullish on EVs as the headlines seem to be?
When it comes to passenger cars, yes, the outlook is quite promising. As we mentioned earlier, battery costs are plummeting, making EVs increasingly competitive with traditional gasoline-powered cars.
But I imagine things get more complicated when we talk about heavier vehicles.
Exactly. Heavy-duty transport, like trucks and buses, presents a much bigger hurdle. The technology for large-scale electric trucks is still evolving, and it's not yet cost-competitive in many applications.
So are biofuels playing a larger role in decarbonizing heavy transport?
They are. Renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuels have seen significant price drops, making them viable alternatives, at least in the short term. But long term, there's still a lot of research and development needed to find truly sustainable solutions for heavy transport.
Sounds like a sector in transition, with a mix of solutions vying for dominance.
Mm.
What about power generation? We talk about the positive trends in solar and wind, but what are the key takeaways for that sector?
The steady decline in solar and wind energy costs is certainly encouraging, but the report highlights energy storage as the real game changer in this sector.
Right, because the big challenge with renewables is their intermittency. Being able to store that energy efficiently and affordably is crucial.
Precisely, and that's where we're seeing huge strides. Advances in battery technology are making grid-scale energy storage increasingly viable, which in turn makes renewable energy more reliable and cost-effective.
But we also talked about the rising cost of green hydrogen. Doesn't that impact power generation too?
Yes, it does. Green hydrogen is seen as a potential fuel for power plants in the future, and it's also a key component of certain energy storage technologies. So the fact that green hydrogen costs are going up is a factor to watch closely. It could slow down progress in those areas.
It sounds like there are a lot of moving pieces in the power sector.
Mm.
What about industry? That's often cited as the toughest nut to crack when it comes to decarbonization. What does the report have to say about that?
It's true. Heavy industries like steel and cement production are responsible for a significant chunk of global emissions, and finding cost-effective ways to decarbonize them is a major challenge.
We've discussed how those early-stage hydrogen-dependent technologies are facing cost increases. Is that the main obstacle in the industry sector?
It's a big one. Many of the technologies needed to decarbonize heavy industry rely on green hydrogen. So the rising cost of hydrogen is a major barrier to adoption. The report also highlights the limited scale of these technologies as another challenge. They haven't yet reached the level of maturity and efficiency needed to drive down costs.
So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. We need to scale up these technologies to bring down costs,
Yeah.
but the high costs are making it difficult to scale up.
Exactly. It's a complex situation that will require both technological innovation and supportive policies to overcome the report. Suggests that carbon pricing mechanisms, for example, could play a role in incentivizing the adoption of these cleaner technologies.
Speaking of policy, the report also talks about the potential impact of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah. Yes, it does. The report notes that the IRA is already having a noticeable effect on the battery industry, encouraging investment and production in the U.S. It's an example of how government policy can play a significant role in shaping the decarbonization landscape.
It's interesting to see how policy decisions made in one country can have ripple effects globally.
Yeah.
It speaks to how interconnected this whole system is.
Absolutely, and it underscores the need for international collaboration. While it's natural for countries to want to support their own industries, climate change is a global problem that demands collective action.
This makes me think about the deglobalization trend we talked about earlier. It seems like there's a tension between countries wanting to control their own clean energy destinies and the need for global cooperation to accelerate the transition.
Yes, that's one of the central dilemmas of our time. We need to find ways to foster a healthy level of competition while also recognizing that we're all in this together.
It's a delicate balancing act. Okay, one last thought before we wrap up this part. The report focuses heavily on the economics of decarbonization. But what about the social and environmental impacts? Those are harder to quantify, but they're no less important.
You're absolutely right. We can't just focus on reducing emissions in a vacuum. We need to consider the broader implications for people and the planet.
It's about creating a sustainable future that's both economically viable and socially equitable.
Exactly. Decarbonization is not just about reducing emissions, it's about building a better world for all.
That's a powerful message, and it leads us perfectly into our next discussion, where we'll explore those social and environmental dimensions of decarbonization in more depth.
We'll be back in part 3 to delve into the human side of the decarbonization equation.
Welcome back. We've spent the last two parts digging into the economics and technologies of decarbonization, but as we hinted at, there's a whole other dimension to this story.
Right, and today we're shifting our focus to the human side of the equation.
Okay.
Social equity and environmental justice. It's about ensuring that the transition to a cleaner energy future doesn't leave anyone behind.
Because it's not enough to just, reduce emissions.
Right.
We need to do it in a way that's fair, inclusive, and benefits everyone, not just those who can afford the latest clean technology.
Yes, exactly. And this is where things get really complex. The shift away from fossil fuels will inevitably create winners and losers.
Right.
Some industries will thrive, while others may decline. Some jobs will be lost, while new ones will emerge.
And we have to be honest about the fact that these impacts won't be felt equally. History shows us that marginalized communities, often low-income or minority groups, are disproportionately affected by pollution and environmental degradation.
Yeah, we need to be incredibly mindful that the clean energy transition doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities.
Right.
For example, if renewable energy projects are developed without community input, they could displace residents or disrupt livelihoods.
So how do we ensure that decarbonization doesn't come at the expense of those who are already most vulnerable? What does a just transition actually look like?
It starts with recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Different communities have different needs and priorities.
Right.
We need to move away from top-down decision-making and instead prioritize genuine community engagement.
That means truly listening to those who are most affected by these changes, understanding their concerns, and involving them in shaping the solutions.
Absolutely. It's about co-creating solutions that work for everyone, and it's about ensuring that the benefits of the clean energy transition,
Yeah.
whether it's job creation, cleaner air, or economic revitalization, are shared equitably.
There's also the challenge of addressing the concerns of workers who might be displaced by the shift away from fossil fuels. How do we ensure they're not left behind?
We need to provide robust support for workers in transitioning industries.
Okay.
That could include job retraining programs, early retirement options, or investments in new industries that create good-paying, sustainable jobs in those same communities.
It's about providing pathways for those workers to benefit from the clean energy economy. And it's not just a domestic issue, right? We have to consider the global implications of climate justice.
Absolutely. The impacts of climate change are being felt most acutely in developing countries, which often have the least resources to adapt.
Right.
We have a moral obligation to support those countries.
That means providing financial assistance to help them build resilience to climate impacts and develop their own clean energy economies. It means sharing technology and expertise.
It's about recognizing our shared responsibility for this global challenge and working together to create a more sustainable and just future for all.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive into decarbonization. We've explored the economics, the technologies, the geopolitics, and now the crucial lens of social and environmental justice.
It's been a fascinating journey, and it highlights just how complex this challenge is. There are no easy answers, no silver bullets.
But one thing is clear, we have the power to shape the future. We have the knowledge, the tools, and the ingenuity to create a world that is not only cleaner, but also more just and equitable.
So as you continue to learn about this issue, consider this.
Yeah.
What role can you play in building this better future? What actions can you take in your own life, your community, or your workplace to make a difference?
Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and remember every action, no matter how small, can contribute to creating a more sustainable and just world for generations to come. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.